Hello and welcome everyone to episode 5 of the True Blue Crime podcast. If you haven't already, please check out episodes 1 through 4. Episode 1 covered the abduction and murder of Jacob Wetterling. Episodes 2 through 4 is a 3-part series covering the Superbike murders and subsequent murders committed by Todd Kohlhepp in South Carolina. If you would like to learn more about True Blue Crime Productions and its podcasts, please like and follow True Blue Crime Productions on the Facebook page. You can check out the website at www.truebluecrimeproductions.com. And as always, if you can, please donate to the Patreon site under True Blue Crime Productions. Or any Patreon donations will allow me to continue to make these episodes and make them free so that everybody that would like to hear them can. If you do donate, just like Jeff did before the last episode, I will give you a shout out in a future recording, as well as give you a thank you message directly to you through the Patreon site itself. And so with all the business out of the way, I want to thank you for listening, tuning into this case. And before I get into the actual case itself, I will let you know that I have mapped out about the next 30 episodes of True Blue Crime. I'm pretty excited as to some of the cases that I will cover, but I decided to do a pattern to them to make sure that I stayed on track and didn't start covering just the same types of cases again and again. So basically every 5th episode is going to be what I call the flyover episode, and that is, it comes from a place that we Minnesotans like to call flyover country, and so that's going to be the upper Midwest. So it's going to be a case that originates in Minnesota, Wisconsin, one of the Dakotas, or Iowa. And some of the cases, like the one today, will be well known and potentially even international, and other ones will be pretty localized to the point that maybe only a small audience knows about the case. For those not familiar, flyover country is a term that is used by people that live in the upper Midwest, because people from the East Coast or the West Coast, since obviously those are a lot more populated, tend to fly from one coast to the other, and in the process we just get flown over. So this is going to be the first flyover case. It is going to be the case of Jayme out of Barron, Wisconsin. This happened back in late 2018 and early 2019, so it's pretty recent. I know it kind of happened basically right before COVID, and while the local news continued to cover it, and I did see quite a bit of international news covering some of the later stages of this case, it did not completely lose people's interest or global interest, but I did want to go back and cover the case from beginning to end, because what I do find a lot of the times is a case will garner a lot of attention when it first happens, whether it be one of these child abductions or mass shootings or whatever it may be, and the news media, the 24-hour news cycle, is covering it for 3, 4, 5 days, and then either suspects identified, arrested, whatever it may be, and things kind of go quiet, and then you'll have something pop up 6 months, 10 months, a year later when that person has their day in court or the trial begins or whatever it may be. But really, it's a segmented information dump on people, and so people kind of lose track or forget or move on with their lives. And what I like to do is I like to find these cases that have gone through all the stages of the crime, the investigation, and the trial, so that I can kind of summarize it all up into one episode. So this is going to be a big episode. It might go past the hour mark, I'm not sure yet, but I feel like it is a case that interests a lot of people locally as well as around the world, and despite some of these serious unfortunate aspects of it, it does have a somewhat happy ending. So the date of this crime is going to be 10/15 of 2018, and the location of this crime is going to be Barron, Wisconsin. Now, Barron, Wisconsin is a town of roughly 1,000 people, and it's located in northwest Wisconsin. This area is known a lot for its lakes and forests, kind of very similar to northern Minnesota or the upper peninsula of Michigan. A lot of people from both Wisconsin and the surrounding states have cabins in this area. I, as a Boy Scout, went to a camp each summer that was up in this area, and I can tell you it is a very beautiful area, and for the most part pretty rural. There's not a whole lot of large towns or attractions or anything like that. It's kind of a place people go to get away. So in this case, we're going to have 3 victims. I think the best way to dive into this case is to just get into the specifics of the case itself, because at the time that this case happened, there was a lot of speculations and questions as to what exactly happened. And I think if I explain it all in chronological time order, some of that is information that we got after the crime was resolved. And while it's always nice to chronologically explain the crime, I think there's going to be better points of discussion as we go along if we treat it with the information we had at the time that the crime happened. So we're going to go into October 15th of 2018. Now this is at 12:53 a.m. So early morning hours, the night of October 14th into October 15th. So this residence in Barron, Wisconsin, the Kloss residence, is going to have an absolute nightmare brought upon them. At roughly 12:53 a.m., a car is going to slowly pull into the driveway off of the road in front of the house. It's going to be said later that the Kloss's dog, named Molly, as dogs do, heard this, sensed this, any combination of above, and alerted the family that something wasn't right. So the male homeowner, identified as James Kloss, age 56, walks to the front door armed with a flashlight. He is going to see someone standing on the other side of the door that begins knocking on the door loudly. Now, it's believed that James thought this might have been a police officer for some reason, and I'm assuming it's just because it's an odd time of night and the person is knocking on the door. So he demands to see a badge, and it's assumed that he looks, the front door itself is your regular front door of a home, but in the top middle, I guess is the best way to describe it, of a panel style door. This center middle panel on the upper side has a decorative glass and an iron window to look through. So you can describe it as a large peephole, but it's something the size of like a piece of paper. And so it's believed that James looks through this area to see who's on the other side of the door and to look for a badge to see it's a police officer. And the person on the other side of the door fires a single shot from a 12 gauge shotgun through this glass door, striking James in the head, killing him instantly. At this point, the suspect then fires another round into the deadbolt area of the door. In law enforcement or military terms, this would be called breaching the door. This would be causing a large amount of damage to the locking mechanism of the door in order to gain entry. So one shot is fired, killing James. Another shot is fired that allows the suspect to gain entry to the home. Now, inside the home, other than who we've mentioned, which is Molly the dog, and James, who's now deceased, is Denise Kloss, age 46, and her and James's daughter, Jayme Kloss, age 13. Denise takes Jayme and they barricade themselves in a bathroom on the upper floor of this home. The suspect starts coming through the home looking for Jayme and eventually is able to locate this locked door. Now, at this time, Denise is calling 911 from her cell phone. It sounds as if the suspect again breached the door to be able to gain access, and it was at that point that the 911 dispatcher opened up. So the dispatcher didn't actually hear the shots, but she hears what is obviously some type of an argument or disturbance on the other side of the phone, and then the phone goes dead. The dispatcher tries to call back that number, and it goes to Denise Kloss's voicemail. The dispatcher was able to ping the cell phone, and this is where we can take a second to explain 911 procedures. Now, I've been out of law enforcement for a couple years, but I was in law enforcement at the time that this incident occurred. A 911 center, if you're calling from a landline, so a business or a home phone that still has a landline, most 911 centers are going to have what's called enhanced 911, meaning that the second that phone call is made, the dispatcher is going to know exactly where that call came from, for the most part. It doesn't always work that way with like phone trees and large businesses or anything like that, but for the most part, if you're calling from a landline or a single line phone somewhere in a business, the dispatcher is going to know exactly what address that phone call came from. Now, in the case of cell phones, since they're mobile, that technology isn't always there. It's not the greatest. Now, what they can do is a lot of dispatch centers, when that phone call is made, GPS style information comes through showing where that phone call originated from. But I will say that this does take at least a little bit more time. So if you are ever in a situation where you need help and you need help immediately, all you have is a cell phone. If you can give the dispatcher, even if you can just shout out to the dispatcher your address or a rough description of where you are, where you need help, you're going to be able to get help there that much faster than if you're only able to call. Even if you have just a few seconds, if you spend those few seconds saying I need help or send police fast, it's going to take more time to get somebody to you because there's just extra steps in place. So in this case, and I'm not faulting Denise in this case, obviously, as we're going to know, there's terrible things going on. So she did what she could to get police there. Now, as it happens, there were several deputies in the dispatch center when this call came in, and the dispatcher very smartly played the audio out loud for these officers to hear. They immediately recognized something wasn't right and began driving code 3 lights and siren to this residence. They're able to get some GPS information and pretty quickly lock in where this disturbance is happening. Now, again, the dispatcher on callback is only getting voicemail, and that's because after the suspect made entry into the into the bathroom, he finds Denise in a bear hug with her daughter Jayme, trying to protect her. They've pulled the shower curtain around them to try to hide. The suspect finds them there. He forces Denise to duct tape Jayme's mouth shut, but Denise kind of fumbles with this. Obviously, she's under a lot of stress, and the suspect shoots Denise in the head. He then applies the duct tape to Jayme's mouth and then binds her wrists and legs with the duct tape, and then begins pulling her out of the house. He gets her out of the house, walks her down to his car, which is still parked at the end of the driveway, throws her in the trunk, and drives off. Now, it's later determined that officers responding to the scene did pass his car as it was leaving the house, and the estimated time was roughly about 20 seconds after he left with Jayme in the trunk. The officers are seeing him on the roadway. Now, the officers have no idea that A, what's going on other than just a disturbance, and B, that this car could be involved anyway. They don't see it leaving the residence. They just see it driving down the road towards them about 20 seconds away from the house. They do make a note of the vehicle. It's dark. They can't see a license plate, but they just believe it's an older red Ford Taurus style vehicle. And they arrive at the residence. So as officers arrive at the residence, the suspect is now beginning his roughly 2-hour drive with Jayme to a residence in town of Gordon, Wisconsin, which again is about 70 miles away from this kidnapping and double homicide occurs. So officers are now arriving, and we'll cover what they did as a part of their investigation, kind of highlight some of the things they did. So basically, as they arrive, they're expecting some type of disturbance in this house. They have no idea exactly what has happened. So they go up towards the front door, they knock and try to make contact with anybody inside the home. Because as far as they know, it's a domestic disturbance, an argument between two people. It's a fight between siblings. I mean, it could be one of many, many things. They're not expecting what they do fine, but they can't treat it because at this point they don't know anything about gunshots or anything along those lines, because all they have is that 911 call in which it sounds like some people are yelling at each other. There's some type of a disturbance going on, and time that they drove there, this disturbance could have calmed down, and they can't just kick in a door or go in to a residence just because some people were arguing. So they're knocking, they're trying to make contact, but of course, unbeknownst to them, there's no one left alive inside the residence. But they can see from the front door, they can see James's body laying kind of in the front area of the home. So now they understand they've got a more serious situation. So they're going to force entry into the home. They also notice that the door has been breached, and they go in, see James laying there. They do a quick sweep of the home because, again, at this time, all they have at this time is one deceased individual. They don't know if that person was shot by somebody else who's still inside the home. They don't know if that person shot themselves, but they don't see a gun immediately with the person. But that doesn't always mean that the gun didn't fall into the body or something along those lines. So they're going to have to go ahead and assume that whoever shot James is still in the house. So they're going to do a sweep of the house as quickly and safely as they can. During the sweep, they're going to find Denise deceased in the bathroom, and the one thing they're going to notice that there is no obvious firearm, because if the firearm had been left there, they likely would have assumed in the beginning that this was a murder-suicide. One party shot the other and then turned the weapon on themselves. It unfortunately happens all too often in these cases, and that would have explained why there was a disturbance, and then the line went dead, and then nobody's answering on the other side, and now you have two deceased people. So they had to have been thinking that the worst thing they're dealing with at this point is a murder-suicide. But as they're walking through the home, they're not seeing the weapon, and these are, not to be too gross here, but the weapon used was a shotgun, and shotgun wounds to the head, to the face area, are devastating. I mean, there is no mistaking the fact that these people are not only deceased, but I mean, it's a very devastating sight to see. So this is not the same damage you're going to see from a handgun or even a smaller caliber rifle. So they know they're looking for a large caliber rifle, or in this case a shotgun, and they're not seeing it. Those are much harder to fall under a body or kind of get dropped somewhere than, say, a handgun. So now they start to think that something else is going on here, that these two people were killed by a third party that is not in the house. So they start looking through the house, trying to identify who else could have been there. Did somebody else live with them? And this is when they're going to notice, I'm assuming, Jayme's bedroom and photos throughout the house. Now, I did read somewhere in a redacted report, and it was kind of interesting because there's parts of it that were redacted and crossed out, stating that one of the deputies recognized a correctional officer in one of the photos, family photos, and they believe that somebody was able to get a hold of that person, who then told the investigators that there was also supposed to be this 13-year-old girl, Jayme Kloss, living at the home. It was strange, and I only say that because most of it was redacted, but later on there was a paragraph that parts weren't redacted, and so I'm not going to use any names. I'm just going to assume that based on what I read and worked around the redactions, that's kind of how they were able to verify that there should be a third person in the home. It should be this 13-year-old girl, and she's not around. So suddenly they go from the worst case being a murder-suicide to potentially the worst case being some type of home invasion robbery where this couple is killed, to now they've got a double homicide and a missing 13-year-old girl. And this is where a lot of theories and speculations began. And I've mentioned in other episodes, one thing that police often don't have going in their favor on these cases is there's not a high likelihood that the officers are going to personally know these families or know the family dynamics. And so when you come across two victims that the officers have never had contact with before, there's going to be a bit of a learning curve to figure out exactly what's going on. Now that's not always the case. Sometimes there's families that are calling the police quite a bit, and so that officers are very familiar with these families. But that didn't seem like that was the case here. So officers are kind of playing a very quick game of catch up to figure out exactly what's going on. So, there's a lot of theories out there. Did Jayme meet some guy online and the parents were preventing her from seeing him and he was an older guy, or just somebody the parents didn't like, even if it was a kid her age, and was there some type of plot to kill the parents and run away together? Was this an instance in which Jayme met someone online or in person that took it upon himself to free Jayme from some type of oppressive parenting or whatever it may be? Because we'll cover some cases, I'm sure, at some point down in the podcast here where that is the case, where teenagers or children of parents have conspired to kill their parents in order to achieve some level of freedom, whether it be pure physical freedom, financial freedom, because their parents have money. But basically everything has to be on the table at this point because Jayme's not there. I'm sure there's not a whole lot known about Jayme. Now, they are going to learn very quickly as a part of this investigation. They're going to talk to relatives and friends and teachers and all kinds of stuff to get an idea of what they might be dealing with. But I'm just talking about that initial few hours when they're at that scene and they're trying to figure out exactly what they have. One thing that law enforcement has to do, and I believe they did in this case, was treat it as if Jayme is a victim. And that involves all of the resources that come with a child abduction. So very quickly we're going to have the FBI involved and multiple agencies involved to try to figure out what happened, why it happened, and where Jayme is. Now, one thing I guess there's not going to be a lot to cover from the crime scene itself. One thing I did note in the readings that was kind of interesting is that pretty early on, officers were fairly confident that the weapon used was a pump 12 gauge shotgun, and the reason for this was that 2 shots were fired from outside the home. They know that the shot that killed James and the shot that breached the door. However, only 1 shotgun shell casing was found outside, and a second shotgun casing was found inside the front door area where no shot had been fired. And so a little lesson here in the operation of shotguns. Shotguns, for the most part, come in either pump or semi-auto. Now, there are lever actions and breech loaders and other things, but for the most part, most of the shotguns you're going to see out there are going to be pump or semi-auto. And a semi-auto shotgun functions much like a semi-automatic handgun, where each time you pull the trigger, a round is going to fire, the gun itself is going to eject that spent casing and insert, if possible, a new casing if there's one from the tube or magazine. So when this happens on a semi-automatic shotgun, any shot that's fired is going to have a casing in the general area in which that shot was fired. So it is almost impossible for someone to fire 2 shots from a semi-automatic shotgun and only have 1 casing found in that general area. However, with a pump shotgun, the user of that shotgun is going to be the mechanical input that removes the fired casing, and then the slide going back forward is going to insert a new round from the tube in this case. So the most likely way that two shots were fired outside and only one shell casing was found outside and one was found inside was that after firing the shot that breached the door, once the suspect entered the home, he then pumped the shotgun, which would have removed the spent casing and inserted a new one, and it would have done it inside the threshold of the home where no shot had been fired. So it's not a case-breaking discovery by any means. It wasn't going to identify the gun or eliminate a suspect or anything along those lines, but just one of those many things that crime scene investigators, police officers on a scene are looking for to kind of tell the story of what happened. And in this case, they do end up being correct in regards to the fact that it was a 12-gauge pump shotgun. So we have the night of the investigation. The next day, I remember this hitting the news. It was a major story, kind of small town, northern Wisconsin. Double homicides don't happen that often, and then to have a 13-year-old missing as a result of it, it caught the media firestorm at the time, which is good because if all theories are still in play, which they likely would have been, at least to some degree. Now, as the days go on and officers do find out more about Jayme, it's not as if any of the family members or teachers or anything like that are going to identify someone in Jayme's life that would be capable of doing this, because the fact of the matter is, as we're going to find out, there just isn't anyone. By all accounts, she was a good student, a good friend. She didn't have any connections to anybody that would do anything like this. So as more and more information is going to come in, more and more likely that investigators are going to believe that what they have here is some type of a unwilling abduction situation, and that Jayme was either abducted and killed or abducted and being held in captivity. So on October 17th, still no one has seen Jayme. And, when I covered the Jacob Wedling case in episode 1, if we think back to 1989, I don't think it would be as shocking to people back in the 80s or early 90s if a child chose to either run away or was abducted by someone they knew, that there wouldn't be any type of footprint left behind in regards to where that person currently is. However, I think in 2018, if a 13-year-old went missing voluntarily, it's very hard for teenagers nowadays, I believe, to stay off of social media, to not have contact with friends. We live in a digital world where contact with somebody else is a small electronic device away from each other. So I think as time goes on, especially now in today's world, not being able to have, or not having anybody having any contact with a teenager is going to raise more alarms than it would have 20, 30 years ago. So we're 2 days removed from her parents being murdered, and nobody has seen or heard anything from Jayme. So the FBI, as I said, is involved. They've got hundreds of tips pouring in. As I talked about in the Jacob Wedling case, this is good and bad. Investigations need tips in order to gain information, but at the same time, a lot of tips can come in that waste law enforcement resources. And I'm not blaming the people calling tips. For the most part, they're just trying to do the right thing. They might see a girl in North Dakota that looks like Jayme at a gas station, and they call it in. And that might be the person that finds Jayme, and that's so I'm not discouraging anyone from calling, but if somebody does it maliciously or does it to garner attention or just try to get a reward when they're not really sure, they're pretty sure it's not Jayme, or they're 100% know it's not Jayme, that wastes a lot of law enforcement resources. So at this time in the investigation, though, they're going to take every tip. They're going to try to find Jayme. That's their goal. That's what they want to do, and they're talking to everybody in Jayme's life. Now, the one thing I did see in a couple of the reports is what's also difficult in today's world is as I mentioned, the social media stuff. There were a lot of local kids in the area. I'm not saying just Bear and Wisconsin, but just in the general area, period, that thought it would be funny to take credit for kidnapping Jayme and killing her parents or whatever it may be. So, of course, people are sending Snapchats to each other or instant messages or whatever, and all that stuff is getting brought to the attention of the police. So they have to now look into all of these rumors and speculations and meritless bragging, I guess, that people are doing, and it's again, it makes the investigation more difficult, but it's just part of the process. We move on to October 22nd. This is now a week after the disappearance, and the sheriff is requesting help for a public search, and thousands of people show up. And I know people that personally made the drive up there to do this search because we're now a week out, and I know there's the golden 24, 48 hours, and we're well past that, and I believe people started to think that if she was taken by some form of a sex offender or something along those lines, that they may have kidnapped her in order to sexually assault her and kill her and leave her body somewhere. And they need to do these searches because they need to, whether she's alive or deceased, they need to find her. And so I remember thousands of people showing up and walking. Again, this is heavily forested areas, there's farms in this area. There's a lot of area to cover, a lot of ground to cover on these searches, and people did show up and looked for anything they could find. And this falls back to what I talked about in one of the earlier episodes, is at what point does something become a piece of evidence? Somebody's going to find a receipt that blew out of a car, a McDonald's receipt, on the day that Jayme went missing. Is that evidence? Is it just trash? Is it just garbage? I mean, it's hard to. It's going to be hard to weed through everything that is evidence and isn't evidence. And with that many people searching, a lot of stuff's going to be found. And unfortunately, in this case, Jayme wasn't found during any of these searches. So on October 24th, Jayme's aunt is going to make a public plea to Jayme and her captor for Jayme to come home. And again, at this point, they still don't know if Jayme's gone voluntarily and is just, hiding out with somebody that she fell in love with and now is afraid to come home or whatever it may be. So they're putting, Jayme's aunt agrees to go on and make this heartfelt message. And the part that got me, I remember this when it happened and when I was doing the research, is Jayme's aunt told Jayme that their dog Molly is waiting for you and sleeps in one of her sweatshirts. And it just got me because my dog, if I leave for more than a couple hours, will go find one of my articles of clothing to bring down and lay with because, it helps with their separation anxiety. And here's this dog that, just lost two of its owners and the third one they can't find. So it just one of those things that when I saw it or when I was researching it, it just kind of it hit me right in the feels. But the same day, the FBI now offers a $25,000 reward for information in regards to Jayme, hoping that will entice somebody who knows something or is maybe hiding Jayme or knows somebody who is hiding Jayme to come forward. Then a few days later, October 27th, Denise and James are laid to rest in a public memorial service. And when I read it in the research, it got me thinking a lot of the times when something big like this happens, the family will still want to do some type of a private memorial service. But at the same time, it's a very valuable tool, and I know it's going to sound morbid, but it's a very valuable tool for law enforcement to have one of these public style funerals. And I'm sure they had a lot of surveillance at this funeral watching, because as far as they know, if Jayme was involved, she may convince whoever took her that she wants to go to her parents' funeral. And even if she put makeup on, a wig on, whatever it may be, people were going to be looking for somebody who's out of place. And if you close it down to just private service, it's less likely that either the killer or the abductor or Jayme is going to show up to this, because it's going to obviously stick out like a sore thumb if they're not part of the family, or if it's only family members they're going to recognize Jayme. So notice this, and just made me think that this, again, as morbid as it sounds, there is a tactic to having these large public services, and it may be something the family wanted too, and it just kind of at that point is beneficial to both parties, I guess. As beneficial as something as terrible as a double funeral for homicide victims can be. So then the next day, everybody thought this was going to be the break in the case. It solved it. The next day, October 28th, this guy named Kyle Janke of Cameron, Wisconsin, is caught via motion-activated cameras breaking into the home. So they installed all types of surveillance equipment, I'm sure, because, again, they don't know that Jayme didn't have a part in this, and at some point isn't going to run out of clothing or want to go back and pick up something she forgot or something along those lines, or the killer's going to go back there to try to do something. So they put up these motion detecting cameras, and they go off and catch this guy breaking into the house. He is arrested coming out of the house with some of Jayme's clothing, including underwear. And so police have to be thinking one of two things: either this guy's a complete and utter psycho and is stealing this missing girl's underwear either for personal pleasure or to try to make money off of it or something along those lines, or he's taking these items because he needs to give Jayme more clothing and underwear and stuff wherever they're hiding out. So police are obviously going to look at this guy extremely closely, but he is cleared of having any involvement in Jayme's abduction and the murder of her parents. And the only thing I can think of is he must have had some type of airtight alibi that had him on camera or at work or something during the time period that these murders and abduction occurred, for them to move on from him within a day or two after this arrest. So ultimately, he's going to get charged with breaking into the home and stealing items, but cleared of any involvement in the murder and the abduction. So now we get to November 17th, and hunting season begins. And northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, hunting season is almost considered a holiday. I guess it is probably considered a holiday by a lot of people. So there's going to be a mass migration of people up to the north woods here of Wisconsin. And so the law enforcement officials reach out to these hunters and say, please keep an eye out for anything that you see. A lot of these hunting shacks and whatnot are only used for a few weeks during hunting season. People put a mobile home or some type of a camper or something like that on 100 and some acre property of just unusable forest or wetland area or something along those lines, just to hunt in for those few weeks a year. So with Jayme going missing in the middle of October, it was possible that, you know, if she was hiding out with somebody, or somebody that was even keeping her against her will, they could be doing so in a hunting shack. The other more depressing reason why is, unfortunately, a lot of bodies are found by hunters because they're out in areas that people aren't normally. And a lot of times these are private lands that are only used for hunting, and killers will dump bodies on them, and then the hunters themselves will discover the bodies. So it's rather common in missing persons cases for law enforcement officials to ask hunters to be on the lookout for something that doesn't quite look right. So we get through hunting season. We're out December 4th. A Christmas tree in Jayme's honor is decorated at the County Justice Center. And then on January 10th, Jayme is found alive. She's found in Gordon, Wisconsin, which is about 70 miles north of where she was taken from. And shortly after she's located, a suspect is arrested. So this, again, kind of set the whole story on fire again. This is 88 days after her parents were killed and she was taken. So let's first discuss the suspect, because I think we can't get much further into this story without talking about who this guy is, and then we'll discuss what exactly happened. So suspect is identified as Jake Patterson. He's born June 17th, 1997 in Wisconsin. So not much is known about his childhood. I mean, I could find his family dynamics and whatnot. It did seem like his parents had a pretty rough marriage. Looks like, when he was about 8 years old, they almost divorced, and then a few years later they followed through with it and officially got divorced when he was about 10 years old. This is the same time period classmates, most of them described him as just being kind of there in school. He did have a few close friends. He did compete in Quiz Bowl and a couple things. So it's not like he was completely antisocial, but a lot of people said he was just kind of a loner and didn't really get involved in a lot of stuff. Now, when he gets to 10th grade, people start noticing that he's getting angry. One classmate said there was a time when he got hit in the face in gym class with a ball or something like that and completely lost it. And people just started noticing him withdrawing more and getting more and more angry. This is about the same time his father apparently left the home, so his older sisters moved out, his father's moved out, and it's just Jake and his older brother Eric. And Eric is no angel either. Apparently he had arrest for 4th-degree sexual assault and had some felony drug charges he was dealing with. So you've got this angry, withdrawn teenager living in a home with no father, and the only adult is involved in sexual assaults and drug charges. So he continues to withdraw. His senior year, he skips prom, doesn't go on the senior class trip, avoids the senior photo, and he tells everybody that he's going to join the Marines. Side note, I guess he was voted the most quiet by his class. So this is, again, just an individual that seems to avoid others, and his dream becomes joining the Marines and becoming an infantry soldier. So he does join the Marines, and he gets shipped off to basic training in the fall after he graduates from high school, which is pretty common for anybody joining the military. They'll go through a lot of their entrance processing and that kind of stuff after they graduate. There's kind of a lull as they wait until a slot opens for them to go into basic training itself. But he only survives 5 weeks of basic training, and I think this is going to be kind of an indicator of who Jake Patterson is, because I went through basic training back in 2000 for infantry for the U.S. Army, and you could tell the recruits that would sign up to be in the military because it was a lifelong goal of them or something along those lines, but they couldn't handle being yelled at. They couldn't handle the rigorous physical stuff that comes along with it. They just either broke down emotionally, physically, whatever it may be, and withdrew. So this is Jake. His lifelong goal is over now. He only makes it 5 weeks into basic training, and he's sent home. So he comes back home, and this is where he begins holding a series of really short-term jobs. And when I mean short-term jobs, I mean like a day or two. There was a day that he went and worked at the Genio plant that Jayme's mother Denise worked at, but nobody could find that there was any contact between the two of them there. I know initially when that was reported, everybody said, well, there's the connection, the mother and him worked together, like he would have, known. No, it's a very large plant, and they said only worked there for a day, and it's pretty much unknown whether they would have even, seen each other, let alone or talked with each other, let alone seen each other. So it's on the way to one of these jobs that he saw Jayme. So he makes this decision because he hates society and he feels he's attracted to younger girls and feels that he doesn't care that society doesn't like that. He's going to take a girl and he doesn't care about the consequences. And literally the first girl he sees after he makes this decision is Jayme getting on the school bus. And he decides that that is going to be his target. So he actually made 2 attempts before the October 15th homicide and abduction. On October 5th, so 10 days before the crimes, he drove to the Kloss home and was going to kidnap Jayme, but he said there's too many cars in the driveway. He came back 2 days later, I'm guessing later, in the evening on the 7th, and he saw lights on and people moving around inside the house, so he aborted that attempt. But by the time October 15th rolled around, he had decided he was going to go in the house no matter what. So he had done several things to try to escape leaving any evidence behind. So he shaved his head, he shaved his face, he showered before he left the apartment. The 12 gauge shotgun that he used was his father's, and he wiped it down before he went into the scene, so he didn't leave any DNA or fingerprints. I'm guessing if he dropped or forgot the shotgun. He purposely picked a Mossberg 12 gauge shotgun because he knew they were extremely popular and that would be harder to trace. However, on a side note, shotgun shells themselves aren't traceable per se, like back to a specific gun. However, the firing pin stamp on the back of the 12 gauge spent casing is still going to be able to be microscopically compared in a ballistics test to a shotgun that would have fired that round. So short of him picking up those rounds that he fired, which he clearly didn't, there's really he's still going to be traced back via the gun if he doesn't get rid of it. But he did make several efforts. He wore a ski mask, he wore gloves, he had stolen license plates to put onto the car so that if somebody reported seeing the car, or if I'm guessing if he had to abort again but somebody saw the car, they wouldn't be able to come find him. He had removed the dome light in the car, he'd removed the trunk light, and he had removed the emergency release hatch that exists in most trunks, where just in case you are a kid and playing around and you fall into the trunk and it closes, by law there's a little string you pull that releases the lock so you can get out from the inside. He had removed that. So he had put a lot of thought and planning into this kidnapping, and ultimately when he was asked why did he kill the parents, he said he had to kill all the witnesses and he didn't care who got in his way. So he had already predetermined that he was going to kill everyone and take Jayme, and he told officials afterwards that he did see the police cars, he did pull over for them, and when asked what would happen if they had turned around and tried to stop him, he said he would have gotten into a shootout with them because he just didn't care. So after his arrest and before his time in court, he's going to go through a mental health evaluation, and although I couldn't find anything saying he was diagnosed with any specific mental health disorder. It was reported that he scored high on anger, criminal personality, and ability to had an ability to rationalize his actions instead of regretting them. So a lot of this kind of goes back to episode 4 with Todd Kohlhepp. Jake Patterson definitely seems to be somebody like Kohlhepp that just has a disconnection from society and will let anger rationalize why he can do certain things or how he can get away with certain things. And he claims to show remorse in court, but I think later on it's going to be seen that he just likes manipulating people or just like saying what he thinks people want to hear, and that people believe he truly does not feel remorse for what he did, other than the fact that he regrets that he got caught, which is very different from remorse for the actual crime itself. So then the question becomes, where was Jayme for those 88 days? How was he able to keep her in captivity? So Patterson took her to that remote house, I guess, up there in Gordon, Wisconsin. And I read somewhere that approximately 10 days after the kidnapping and homicide, that Patterson's father had given the house title over to the bank. So I don't know if it was some type of a foreclosure situation or something along those lines. There was just mention of the fact that the father wasn't really involved with the house, so this was kind of a place where Patterson could keep Jayme without anybody really knowing. Now, he was able to keep her there for 88 days, and she's able to say afterwards what he would do is if he needed to leave or if somebody was coming over, in his bedroom he had this twin bed, and he would have her get under the bed, and then he would line the open areas of the bed. Is two parts of her up against the wall, so the bed was up against the back wall, or the headboard of the bed was against the wall, and one of the sides of the bed was against the wall. He would line the base of the bed and the open side with, like I said, duffel bags and suitcases and laundry baskets and stuff, but he would throw a bunch of weights in there, like heavy weightlifting style weights, so that A, it would be more difficult for her to move them, and B, if she did move them, he would be able to see that. But he didn't have any like locks on the door or anything like that, because I'm pretty sure he was afraid somebody would question him about that. So, and he threatened her, if she tried to escape or if she tried to alert anybody that she was there, that he would hurt her. I guess one time he did hit her with some type of a duster or something on her back really hard when he thought she had moved one of the weights while he was gone or while he was away. And you have to realize that this poor girl, knows that this guy killed both of her parents. So he's clearly capable of extreme violence to the point of homicide. So as a 13-year-old girl, she's not likely to risk testing this guy to see like where her limits are at. She probably feels it's just safer to go along with his demands and to not rock the boat for now and just hope that she gets rescued. And I'm sure that was going through her mind a lot during those 88 days, that she just hoped that somebody would figure out who has her and where she is and just come to her rescue. But at some point, Patterson tells her that he's on the day that she was found, January 10th, Patterson tells her he's leaving for a few hours, and she decides this is her chance, this is her opportunity. And I have to believe at some point that Patterson was continuing to let his guard down more and more, and just felt more either comfortable leaving her, thinking she wasn't going to do anything because she hadn't before. Just something he couldn't remain at a high level of security and alertness for. This is now 88 days in, so I think he just finally let his guard down enough, and she saw the opportunity, and she bravely took it and ran across the street and found the dog walker and told her what was going on. So thankfully, after she came across the dog walker during her escape, the dog walker took her to a nearby house where they called 911. The sheriff's deputies arrived, took her into protective custody, and they're asking her, do you know which house you were staying in? Do you know who lives there? Do you know what vehicle they drive? She described Patterson's vehicle, and it just so happens that vehicle was out driving around. Officers found a reason to stop it. I think it had a tail light out and a license plate light out, or a cracked tail light or something along those lines, but stopped the vehicle, and the driver was identified as Jake Patterson, and he was taken into custody at that point. So her bravery of getting to escape not only saved her life, but it prevented him from being able to get away. Now, he would later go on and say that he had come home from whatever he was doing and found that she wasn't under the bed, assumed that she had escaped, and was driving around looking for her. So his hope was that nobody was out and about. This is a pretty remote area, and that he would find her, basically abduct her again and bring her back. And either that was going to happen, or he was going to kill her, and then clearly he would have likely taken somebody else at that point. So ultimately, Patterson is going to plead guilty on March 27th. He pleads guilty to 2 counts of first-degree homicide and 1 count of kidnapping. Now, I read in several locations that he claims he did this to just put an end to the whole situation. He tried to come across as being this super nice guy that was just willing to plead to make sure that Jayme's family didn't go through any more trauma, but I don't think anybody really bought it for a second that he was this caring, nice individual. It just, again, I think it fits into his manipulative personality that he's just going to try to make him look like he's in the best light possible. So on May 24th, Patterson sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 40 years for the kidnapping. And I believe I read somewhere the judge told him that he was an extremely evil man and was going to make sure that he did not see the outside world again. Some people kind of question why there weren't any charges against, so all of those charges were out of Barron County, but where the original homicide abduction occurred. And some people kind of question why the officials in the area where she was held in captivity and escaped from, why they didn't bring their own charges against Patterson. And it was explained that he already was going to be facing 2 consecutive life sentences plus 40 years without the possibility of parole. So he wasn't getting out, and any charges, if he decided he was going to fight any assault charges or unlawful detainer charge, whatever it may be, in this other area, that would put or would potentially bring Jayme in as a witness to be questioned during any type of trial, and they just felt it just wasn't worth it. She was ready to be out of the limelight and just try to go back to living her life, and at this point there was really no need for those charges. Now, the only other thing I found in this case that was interesting was that in 2019, Patterson was moved from Wisconsin to New Mexico to serve his time down in New Mexico because of security issues. Now, I know that anybody who commits a crime that involves a child is going to be very low on the ladder in prison. Comes to how they are treated, and it sounds like because this case was so well known in Wisconsin, I'm guessing Patterson was not having a very good time in the Wisconsin correctional world. So the only thing, I understand the move, but I guess a lot of secretive stuff started to happen in terms of the Wisconsin Department of Corrections refused or took Patterson off of a database that was accessible by the public as to where this person is currently incarcerated. And there are some reasons why I guess corrections are supposed to be allowed to do that, but in this case it made a lot of people very upset that this was done, because they couldn't really see a reason why Patterson's location needed to be protected. I mean, if he's in prison, the other prisoners are going to know he's there. So the only thing I guess I could see is if somebody wanted to target him, another prisoner wanted to target him and do something to him and somehow manipulated the system into getting transferred to that prison. That's about the only way I could think of, but I have to imagine that the information network within these prisons and whatnot, the prisoners are going to know more than the outside world is going to know in regards to who's at what prison. And so it did seem unnecessary that the Department of Corrections was going to keep that information from the public, and a lot of people started to kind of cry about conspiracy theories or too much, secretive stuff going on in regards to this. But ultimately, I guess the thing is no matter where Patterson is, he's never seeing the light of day, and he's likely going to face, we'll just call them security issues, wherever he ends up in whatever prison he ends up in, because people are going to know who he is. So, as I've done before, I mean, this is pretty obvious who the hero of this story is. Just like in the case of Kayla Brown in the Superbike Murders episodes, Jayme has to be absolutely the hero of this case. Now, I did see somewhere where I think Genio itself had offered a $25,000 reward for information leading to the capture of whoever killed Denise, since she worked for Genio, and the safe return of Jayme. And since Jayme rescued herself and gave police the suspect on a silver platter, Genio followed through and gave that money to Jayme. And I think that's one of the few bright spots in the story. I also got to see a few photos of Jayme afterwards, and she's back reunited with Molly, so that warms my heart a little bit that this dog has one of its humans back, at least in its life. So I'm sure there's some healing going on there in regards for Jayme having Molly back as well. So again, without really needing much explanation, I can definitely say that Jayme's a hero in my book, and I hope that despite everything that she went through, and obviously the devastating loss of her parents, that she's able to get the most she can out of life and know that she's a super strong person that could survive this and make sure that the monster that did this is never going to see the outside world again. So that's going to wrap it up for the case of Jayme Closs, my first flyover country episode. So again, thank you everyone for listening. Stay tuned for future episodes. Like I said, I have about 30 episodes planned out here with some pretty cool cases that I can't wait to cover. Feel free to write me at truebluecrimeproductions@gmail.com. If you have any requests, I'll add them on to the list of future episodes, and then find me on the Facebook, and if you can, donate to Patreon so I can keep putting out these free podcasts. Thanks much, guys. Talk to you later. Bye.